But Russia continues to deny it plans to invade Ukraine, while it says it's withdrawn 10 convoys of troops from Crimea. Though NATO says it hasn't seen any evidence of that pullback.
Despite Moscow's claims, we have seen no sign of withdrawal or de-escalation so far. On the contrary, Russia's build-up appears to continue. We continue to monitor developments very closely. We call on Russia to do what it says and withdraw its forces from the borders of Ukraine. This will be an important first step towards a peaceful political solution.
And for the latest on the crisis, we can now speak to Arise special correspondent Karl Bostic, who joins us from our studios in London. Karl, thank you so much for being here. And can you take us through why this reports of shelling at a village in eastern Ukraine may or may not be an actual escalation in the crisis?
That's right. Good evening, Amaka. What we saw today with the shelling of this kindergarten school in eastern Ukraine, this was part of a separate dispute, an ongoing dispute that goes back to 2014. That's after the annexation of Crimea by Russia. These two provinces, Donetsk and Luhansk, they're predominantly Russian-speaking provinces. You have a separatist war going on there with about 35,000 separatists from that region who want autonomy, backed by 3,000 to 5,000 Russian troops. So that's a separate thing. So that's always been kind of an outstanding issue because that could be a possible pretext, or as we're now hearing, a false flag operation where Russians may feel under threat. Russian-speaking people, that is, because that's still part of Ukraine. So it's very murky, it's very unclear. What you need to consider is also this, Amaka. This, because of this disputed situation, is really more or less a frozen war, a stalemated conflict since 2014, where you actually have a Minsk agreement, a ceasefire agreement going back that time, monitored by the OSCE. But since then, there have been violations, dozens of violations every day. This morning, there were like 29, 30 violations of small arms fire exchanges and such. However, in this case, we had an artillery fire, about 30 rounds of artillery towards this town in the Ukrainian part of the territory. Again, these two provinces, the Russian separatists only control about a third of that territory. And to put things in a larger perspective, Amaka, Ukraine, a country of about 44 million people, about 8 million are Russian speakers. But the vast majority of them, they want to be Ukrainian citizens. So what to keep in context is this. You know, this has been going on constantly for the past 8 years. What's new or different is this. When you've got artillery fire happening, you have senior observers such as the former Swedish Prime Minister Carl Bildt saying, you don't get the authorization or use of artillery, mortar firing targeted towards these locations without approval of Moscow. So that's why people feel this could be a red flag, a false flag situation right there. And then, for example, you've got the Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin in Brussels saying that he's a soldier by training. He commanded troops in Iraq, Afghanistan, and that entire region of the Middle East. And he says, listen, I know when someone's packing up to going home. But instead, they're flying in combat and support aircraft. They're even stocking up blood supplies in anticipation of possible casualties. That's what's happening there. You've got Secretary of State Antony Blinken. He was headed towards a security conference in Munich this weekend. He had to juggle his plans to make an appearance at the UN Security Council earlier today to make the point that we think this is imminent. But Amaka, what everyone is watching for is this. We talk about these false flag operations where they may stage an attack as a provocation to say that this is the excuse for why they go in. Everyone is watching to see what happens after Sunday the 20th. That's when these exercises in Belarus, 30,000 Russian troops are supposed to end. That's also the same day as the end of the Beijing Winter Olympics. So will those troops stay or will they go? And if they leave, will they take away their heavy equipment, which includes anti-missile batteries, as well as short-range ballistic missiles as well? So that's why we're saying within the next few days, between now and Sunday, we'll see more indications of whether or not Russia is really seriously intent on finding a peaceful resolution, or are they ready to invade? And unfortunately, Amaka, since last Monday, all indications are they are really poised and ready to invade and attack.
Right, and of course the US is still insisting, especially looking at the shelling today, says that war appears to be imminent, really. And speaking about the US, well, the US and its allies in NATO are now pushing back on those claims by Russia that they are beginning to withdraw partially. What more can you tell us concerning this, Cal?
Well, what's interesting is this, Amaka. Just look at the past week. Today is what, Thursday? Monday, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov tells Putin that diplomatic talks to resolve this are far from exhausted. Tuesday, President Putin says that there will be a partial withdrawal of Russian troops from the border. We saw a video, we saw footage of Russian troops and heavy equipment leaving the Russian border, supposedly. We saw the same thing on Wednesday. But then we find, President Biden is saying, actually, they've increased the deployment. Early January, it was 100,000 troops on the border. End of January, 130,000 troops on the border. Now President Biden is saying 150,000 plus. That's more than 60% of Russia's combat forces, not to mention the most sophisticated the short-range ballistic missiles, the Iskander missile batteries, which can basically fire within 15 feet of a target after traveling about 300 miles. They're in 36 different locations along the border. They have not moved. So they're looking for things like that. And then UK's Boris Johnson says, we've even seen evidence of field hospitals being moved closer to the border. So there's no evidence really, quite frankly, of that pullback. If anything, it's an increase. So really, they're preparing for war, if nothing else, and that's what's so worrying, because what we're seeing are mixed messages that are coming out of Moscow.
Yeah, quite interesting times, really, Cal. But what do you think about the strategy, and what do you think it is, really, talking about strategies for the U.S. as well as even the Russian president, Vladimir Putin? Briefly, quick, please.
Got to keep in mind, just Amaka, Vladimir Putin is playing the long game. This goes back to 2014 when they annexed Crimea. They do not want to see Ukraine drifting to the west. They do not want to see Ukraine becoming a member of NATO or becoming a member of the EU. Putin will be a president for quite some time. He keeps changing the constitution. He could be leader until maybe 2036. President Joe Biden, who knows? Next election is like in a year or two away. His strategy is, as long as they keep the pressure up, the tensions high, meaning troops on the border, maybe they can extract those concessions peacefully. Those concessions being making sure that NATO never expands or never allows Ukraine to become a part of NATO, but also at the same time making sure that all those deployments of NATO troops and equipment are withdrawn from those Eastern European countries that were once part of the Soviet Union or the Warsaw Pact, which is really unthinkable because the U.S. NATO is saying that's not going to happen at all. So really it's a game of brinksmanship. It's a very deadly poker game. And as far as the U.S. is concerned, even though the U.S. is the leader in all of this, they cannot do things without multilateral support, the support of the European countries. And that's why we're at where we are today, where the U.S. also has to make sure that they can convince and keep about 30 countries in NATO on the same page as they are. That's why it's so complicated and dangerous.
Absolutely. Well, Karl, we'll keep an eye out to see the latest developments as they come in. But in the meantime, I would say thank you so much for your in-depth analysis tonight. Karl Bostic there in our London studio.